You notice it first in the smallest moments, when a conversation that used to feel warm suddenly sounds hollow. The laughter still echoes, but you can sense the effort beneath it. People talk about vacations, promotions, and plans, and though you smile, something in you remains silent. It isn't arrogance, it's depth. You've begun to see through the surface of things, and once the curtain lifts, you can't unsee the strings that make the play believable. Alan Watts once said that awakening is the end of pretending. That's the hidden heartbreak of consciousness. As you awaken, love doesn't vanish. It expands until it no longer fits inside shallow forms. You start craving connection that doesn't perform, affection that doesn't depend on illusion. But the world trades in illusion, and the marketplace of relationships runs on roles, masks, and convenient lies. So the deeper you awaken, the harder it becomes to love the way you used to. You feel too much truth in the spaces between words. You see the hunger for validation disguised as intimacy, and you realize that to love authentically means loving beyond personality, beyond need, beyond reward. It's no longer romance, it's reverence, and reverence is lonely, at least at first. That's the paradox every awakened heart must face. The more limitless your love becomes, the fewer places it can safely live. There's a loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from standing in a room full of people and realizing that the language of your heart no longer matches theirs. You listen, you nod, you smile, but underneath, something aches. It's not judgment, it's distance. You feel like you've stepped out of a dream that everyone else still believes is real. You try to go back. You tell yourself to lighten up, to laugh the way you used to find comfort in the easy rhythms of conversation. But the more awake you become, the more foreign the familiar feels. What used to excite you now exhausts you. The drama, the gossip, the rush to be understood, it all feels like static around a still heart. Sometimes you wonder if something's wrong with you. Why can't you just love like before? Quickly, carelessly, without this constant awareness. You used to fall for smiles and stories. Now you see the masks, the defenses, the quiet fear behind every charming word. It's not cynicism, it's clarity. And clarity makes you careful. You crave connection, but you can't fake resonance. So you withdraw, not out of pride, but self-protection, because every shallow exchange feels like a small betrayal of the truth you've seen. You miss the simplicity of blind affection, the way love once felt like escape instead of exposure. Now it feels like standing in bright light, beautiful but impossible to hide in. This is the wound the awakened rarely admit. You didn't lose your ability to love. You lost your ability to pretend, and that realization changes every relationship you have, from others and with yourself. Alan Watts often said that awakening isn't an addition to who you are, it's a subtraction. It peels away everything borrowed, beliefs, identities, and emotional reflexes that once kept you comfortable inside the dream. What remains is awareness itself, pure, unfiltered, unable to lie. And once you see through illusion, you can't unsee it. That's why love changes after awakening. You no longer relate through projection, but through presence. And presence is uncompromising. Before awakening, love is often an unconscious bargain. You show me the version of myself I want to believe in, and I'll do the same for you. Two masks touching, calling it intimacy. But when consciousness expands, those masks start to burn. You begin to see the fragile ego behind every romantic gesture, the fear of abandonment disguised as devotion, the need for validation camouflaged as affection. You see it in others because you've seen it in yourself. And now what once felt like connection feels like camouflage. Carl Jung called this confrontation shadow integration. It's when the hidden motives of love crawl out from the unconscious. You realize how much of your affection was survival in disguise, the child seeking safety, the adult seeking reflection, the ego seeking applause. You don't hate others for this. You simply can't join the game anymore. The play has ended, and you can't pretend not to see the stage lights. Watts would say this is the point where most people mistake awakening for detachment. It isn't that you stop loving, it's that love changes frequency. You move from desire to awareness, from possession to participation. The heart stops grabbing and starts witnessing. But the world doesn't know how to meet that kind of love. It wants stories, not silence, passion, not presence. And so the awakened heart feels like a foreigner in its own home. There's also another layer, the fear of losing warmth. Because awareness brings stillness, and stillness can look like indifference to those still ruled by motion. You might even grieve your old emotional self, the one that could love loudly, chase without thinking, confuse chaos with meaning. But that grief is sacred. It's consciousness letting go of its favorite disguise, the rescuer, the lover, the one who fixes everything through affection. Awakening exposes that real love is not an emotion you perform. It's the recognition that everything you touch is you in another form. It's no longer, I love you because you complete me, but I love you because you are me. Yet that realization, while profound, also isolates. Because very few are ready to be loved without conditions. They still need the mirrors, the masks, the chase. And you, standing there with your clear heart and empty hands, realize that you can't make yourself smaller again. This is the cost of clarity. The deeper you awaken, the more your love becomes light. And light, by its nature, exposes everything it touches. It warms, but it also reveals, and revelation, though divine, is rarely comfortable. At first, this clarity feels like exile. You think you've lost the ability to love, but what's really fading is the illusion of love, the constant reaching, the anxious performing, the small negotiations we once called devotion. What's dying is not your heart, it's the habit of mistaking attachment for affection. And death, in this sense, is mercy. Alan Watts used to remind his students that every wave must collapse before it can return to the sea. Your old way of loving is that collapsing wave, foaming, breaking, disappearing into something vaster. You're not losing passion, you're dissolving into awareness itself. And from that stillness, a different warmth begins to rise, not excitement but peace, not desire but presence. This is where the transformation hides, in the quiet after the storm of personality. The ache that once felt like loneliness is actually spaciousness, room for truth to breathe. In that space, you start to see others not as roles in your story, but as expressions of the same life looking back at itself. You no longer need them to complete you. You need only to witness them. And paradoxically, that's when love deepens. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When your own darkness stops frightening you, other people's shadows stop threatening your love. You realize that everyone is doing their best to wake up in their own time, and compassion replaces judgment, a softer kind of seeing that doesn't demand anyone meet you at your level of awareness. This is the liberation hidden inside the loss. You're free to love without transaction, without fear, without need. You can stand in a crowd again and feel connected, not because you agree with anyone, but because you finally understand you are no different from them. What you thought was separation was really transformation. The deeper you awaken, the less you love to escape pain, and the more you love because pain itself has become transparent. That is the threshold of real freedom, when even solitude feels like communion. There's a difference between understanding awakening and living it. Intellectual clarity may come in a flash, but embodiment takes time. The heart learns slower than the mind. So this next phase isn't about fixing your solitude, it's about listening to what it's teaching you. Alan Watts often said that life, like music, isn't meant to reach a conclusion. You don't dance to arrive at the end of the song. You dance to inhabit it completely. These reflections are small ways to dance again inside your own awareness. To love, not despite awakening, but because of it. 1. Let silence be the conversation. The world will tempt you to fill every pause, to prove your warmth by speaking, reassuring, explaining. But there's a deeper intimacy that happens in silence, when two souls share a field of presence without the need for noise. Try sitting in stillness with yourself, as if you were your own companion. Notice how the mind wants to narrate, to plan, to fix. Then notice the awareness that watches all of it without resistance. That quiet witness is the love you've been searching for. The more you rest there, the more you see that love was never a conversation. It was the space in which every word appears. 2. Replace effort with allowing. Awakened love isn't achieved by intensity, but by surrender. You can't force connection, you can only allow it. When you feel the impulse to reach, to prove, to fix the distance between yourself and another, pause. Sense the energy behind that urge. It's the old self, still afraid of being unseen. Breathe into that fear. Let it unfold like a wave returning to shore. Watts would call this the art of effortless action, or Wu Wei, letting life flow through you instead of pushing it where you think it should go. Love thrives in that effortless openness. 3. See others as mirrors, not measures. The ego compares. Awareness reflects. Every person who triggers you, who feels too shallow, too loud, too asleep, is showing you something about the parts of yourself still learning gentleness. Observe them like weather passing through your field of perception. You'll start to see that their lack of awareness isn't a threat to yours. It's an invitation to stay rooted in compassion. When you can meet unconsciousness with patience, you become a teacher without teaching. Your presence does the work. 4. Redefine love as seeing, not holding. Love used to mean possession, reassurance, merging. Now it becomes sight. To love someone is to see them, not as a story, not as potential, but as a moment of the same consciousness wearing another face. It doesn't mean you must stay. It means you no longer need to own. That shift from I need you to I see you turns loneliness into reverence. You stop searching for reflections and begin shining as one. If you can live even one of these reflections, love stops being something to perform and becomes something to recognize. The heart that once broke under the weight of awareness learns to rest inside it. And from that rest, you begin to understand what Watts meant when he said, "You are the universe looking at itself, in love with the view." Awakening may begin in solitude, but it isn't meant to end there. Eventually, the silence that once separated you starts to hum with a quiet invitation to re-enter the world, not as the person you were, but as the awareness you've become. You realize that life was never asking you to choose between stillness and connection. It was teaching you how to bring stillness into connection. You start showing up differently. Conversations no longer feel like performances. They become listening in disguise. When people speak, you hear the tremor beneath their words, the longing to be seen, the confusion they mistake for certainty. You don't rush to correct them anymore. You meet them where they are, because you remember what it was like to live behind your own illusions. Your empathy stops being an effort and becomes a way of breathing. Solitude taught you how to sit with your own chaos. Compassion teaches you how to sit with theirs. And this is where awakening matures. When awareness stops protecting itself and begins to serve, you learn that you can walk through noise without being noisy, love without losing yourself, and stand among the asleep without forgetting that you've woken up. Alan Watts said that the meaning of life is just to be alive. It's so simple, yet we rush right past it. Now, you understand. Awakening isn't an escape from the human story, but a way to live it with your eyes open. You still feel the ache of separation at times, but it no longer frightens you. You know that even isolation has rhythm, that every withdrawal carries the seed of return. So you return, quietly radiant, not to prove your light, but to share it by existing fully. And in that quiet participation, you realize the truth. The more deeply you awaken, the more naturally you love, without needing to call it love at all. Some evenings, the sky will remind you of everything you've learned. You'll watch light fade into quiet and realize that nothing in nature forces connection. Day doesn't cling to night, nor the tide to the shore. Everything meets, merges, and releases in perfect rhythm. That's what awakening teaches you. Love isn't a cage, it's a current. When you stop chasing permanence, you finally feel the pulse of eternity moving through impermanence. There will still be moments of loneliness, of wanting someone to meet you in this clarity. But those moments no longer define you, they soften you, because the heart that can sit alone in silence without shrinking becomes the same heart that can stand among others without armor. That is the quiet triumph of awareness. It turns solitude into strength and understanding into compassion. So if you've been feeling the ache of seeing too deeply, know this. It isn't a flaw in your heart, it's proof of its expansion. The deeper you awaken, the purer your love becomes. And the world, though it may not always understand you, will feel it. If these words found you at the right moment, stay with us. Subscribe to the Cosmic Awakening channel, listen and keep awakening, gently, honestly, together.